All right, Sublation Media viewers and readers, it is the Sublation Magazine show. We are going to be talking about the Barbie movie and about Donald Trump. We'll see you on the other side of the intro.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Well, we would be quite fashionably late to the scene to be just talking about the Barbie movie. Although, to be fair, Ryan Gosling did get a nomination, right? So that's like kind of recent news. Anyways, so I'm Ashley Frawley. I'm a sociologist at the University of Kent, and I am COO of Symbolism Media. And you are Doug?
I am Doug Lain, the head of Sublation Media, novelist behind Bash Bash Revolution, Critical Cuts maker on the YouTube channel. And the reason we're talking about Barbie again is because Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie, I think those are the names, were both snubbed for nominations at the Oscars. And Hillary Rodham Clinton put out a statement in support of them in their time of need. Let's see if I can find I have I'll tell you what, I'll put it up in just a minute.
While you're looking for that, this supports my thesis that I am very curious to know why men had so much outrage toward this movie. Because both within the movie and in the outside world, is it not all at the end of the day really about Ken? Women's liberation. Was it really about women's liberation? Or was it at the end of the day really about Ken?
Well, okay, let's just I have things to say about here's the statement from Hillary Clinton. It's Greta and Margot, while it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold, your millions of fans love you. You're both so much more than enough. That's the hashtag Hillary Barbie. Okay, so why did I have angry man feelings about this movie? Well, I'll tell you the primary reason that I had angry man feelings about this movie was because if I was critical of the movie, it was characterized as me having angry man feelings about the movie.
All right,
so
go on.
That would be my. I'll just go ahead. I was going to have you go first, but so I have a bunch of stuff written down. So when I saw the Barbie movie, I walked out feeling defeated. On the one hand, the movie was a kid's show, a movie about a toy. It was campy and absurd. On the other hand, it was a propaganda film that pushed various critiques of society. For instance, a version of Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth, which claims that Barbie, by setting unrealistic beauty standards, does psychic damage to girls and women and undermines their confidence and self-esteem. Or another one that was in the movie is The Theory of the Glass Ceiling, which accepts that the hierarchical structures in society as we know them are fine, but claims that sexist attitudes are limiting the admission of women to the highest rungs in society. The film accepts the battle of the sexes as a natural fact, despite taking place in a fantasy land run by the corporation Mattel and presenting itself as a cultural critique. So I felt like it was a perfectly constructed propaganda piece as it deconstructed itself while remaining firmly committed to its ideological premises. It felt like a Chinese finger trap of a movie. To critique it would be to affirm it. To take it seriously enough to object to its message would demonstrate my male fragility. To laugh it off would be to agree with it. So the film shut down thought and reaffirmed the framing that had emerged out of both the second half of the 20th century and even more out of the 2016 American presidential campaign. And I thought the film was, most of all, an affirmation of Clinton-style feminism. It was an affirmation of the impasse of the new left that was presented in a manner that made it immune to serious consideration or critique. It was debased from the start and would debase all attempts to reckon with it. So that's my kind of overall statement.
Those are some angry man feelings, I have to say. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, so the idea that Barbie does psychic damage to women, that appeared in the film. At the same time, they don't really run with that, do they? Like the dressing up and having Margot Robbie as like stereotypical Barbie, like they run with the fun of dressing up. So so they don't it's not, I think they kind of keep the idea of unrealistic beauty standards at arm's length, and kind of go with this idea of it's all just a bit campy and fun. And when she goes out into the real world, like I get the idea that it's like, oh gosh, in the real world things aren't like this, and etc. But at the same time, like it's not like Ken could simply rock up and be like, hey, I can be a doctor, can't I? It was like he was talking to a female doctor and she's like, get the fuck out of here. Someone call security. So there was, these kinds of cliched ideas about society were there. I don't know. They were there in the kind of subtext, or what happens. I don't know what the viewer is supposed to be aware of before they kind of watch the film. The teenager who says you're a fascist, all these sorts of things. That's sort of the silly critique that a young person will give who thinks of herself as different or whatever of Barbie, Yeah. Anyways, and yet it kind of makes fun of this. And I'm not on the side of the film. I'm just sort of saying I'm not sure that it really does just trot out all of these cliched ideas of modern feminism in the way that you say it does.
Well, it does trot them out. It does. They're mentioned. They get trotted out. They don't get affirmed.
And uncritically is what I mean. Like everybody just sort of this. I don't know. It doesn't take any of that stuff seriously. It would be ludicrous if it did.
It doesn't take anything particularly seriously, right? It's a kids film. It's a comedy. It's ironic. It's self-knowing. But it also doesn't provide any space for thinking about any of the issues that it raises either. And you have to, so like, what is the, it's actually a kind of a messy film. In a way, it could have been an art film if it was done a little bit differently, because it breaks a lot of genre conventions, or there's erratic voiceover in the film, if I remember correctly. The narrator intrudes at key moments, but not consistently. It doesn't want to outright make any claim. I don't think, but it does end up making a kind of a few claims. But yeah, I will agree that it is not a straightforward agitprop film, and it does leave itself a lot of wiggle room, and it's done half ironically throughout. So my problem was not that they brought up the beauty myth, but that they bring it up so you can mock it and believe it at the same time. Maybe I'm being Zizekian here, but the way in which you take up the ideology is by conceiving of yourself as above it, not really believing it, but at the same time not having any alternative to it. That's what I would say about the Barbie movie's Clinton-esque ideology.
Okay, so I'm not like, these are not my views that I'm putting forward. I'm just kind of pushing against you a little bit here. I'll tell you what I think, what I thought was actually interesting about the film in a minute. But so now on this idea of that it affirmed the narrative frame that emerged after the 2016 campaign. I'm going to need you to unpack that. What do you mean by that?
So I'm getting distracted by people giving me trouble in the chat here. It's like the core issue is existential dread about death. So what do I mean about it coming out of the 2016 campaign?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the way in which it affirmed the war of the sexes, which did kind of emerge again, had been percolating in the background for probably a decade before the 2016 campaign, and certainly in the early 2010s. But the way in which it took it up, it did so in by not examining the causes of the reframing of the battle of the sexes. So, around 2000, I'm going to say 12 to 14, online and in the culture, battle lines were drawn between feminism and I'm going to say the right, and that specifically like the men's rights movement and that kind of thing. So that became visible in
Right. I see what you're saying.
2012. Okay. And it took that dichotomy, that frame, and put it into the film as a battle between Ken and Barbie. So, but it had the battle of the sexes is a long-standing trope, and it had been around for a long time. Some evolutionary psychologists would say that it's always been around, but in this film, the particular version of it was taken as the background, but in a way that I think I'm going to say reified it, so we couldn't critically examine that frame. Like, is it the case that there really is a battle between men and women in society on the ground, on the level that the men's rights movement would say, or on the level that like a publication like Jezebel would say it? But that was the frame, but for the two sides of the so-called debate in the Barbie movie, roughly.
Yeah. So this is the thing, that the whole like culture war, and particularly American culture war and American political context, was there and sort of taken for granted. And if you didn't know about any of that, you wouldn't have read that into it, right? So I was, when we talked about what we're going to talk about this week, I was like, that seems like a big stretch. How are we linking the Barbie movie to Hillary Clinton? See, now the way that I read the film is what actually winds up happening is that Ryan Gosling's character Ken is the only one who actually gets a character arc. So Barbie has no depth of character at all. She's like this Christ-like figure that rescues people, where she you think like she's going to go on this journey where she thinks about, I don't know, death and all of that stuff, or maybe there might be something about a mother-daughter relationship or something. There's that whole thing, there's that whole subplot with the mother-daughter where you think, oh, there might, maybe something will develop here. No, nothing develops there. No, none of the female characters have any depth whatsoever. And then at the end, she ascends into heaven, essentially. But like in reverse, she starts out in this like quasi heaven, and then she goes down to earth to become human. So it's very like religious kind of undertones. But in the end, like she kind of ascends into heaven. She's gone. She's out of the picture. We assume that, I guess the idea is that she's going to go on this journey of like self-discovery or whatever. She's going to begin a life. But really, I mean, the whole time she's just like, I'm Barbie. I'm Barbara. That's it. That's her fucking character arc. There's nothing to it. There's nothing there. Whereas the man gets all of this depth, all of this like journey of self-understanding. Now, of course, at the end, he remains smooth between the legs and is just Ken, and that's fine. But still, he gets this kind of, and then he go out into the world, and he's the one who the people are like, well, is this movie? It's Ken's movie, right? Really, it's a story about Ken. And then Ryan Gosling gets nominated for an Oscar. Right. So it struck me as very interesting the way that some forms of feminism can play out, which is this kind of, which is not really feminism at all, which is this idea of like women are wonderful. And you get that in Margot Robbie's character, or like sort of portrayal, where she's just really wonderful. And she's going to help Ken to kind of like find himself. She's going to help all the Barbies liberate Barbie land. You know, she's wonderful, and she's wonderful in all the ways that Barbie's wonderful. Women are wonderful, right? But the whole women are wonderful narrative is deeply, deeply misogynistic, because it's women must be wonderful. And this is why, like, in the real world, you know, I'm not a feminist, I swear to God, but I'm just saying, in the real world, you know, women will get much harsher sentences, for instance, killing children, which is a horrific crime, right? But they get a much harsher sentence because the expectation is you are doubly deviant. You're deviant, first of all, for killing a child, which is already one of the most deviant things you can do, but you're doubly deviant because you have transgressed what is expected of motherhood, right? Motherhood is wonderful. You have transgressed that. So as a woman, you're often, this happens with the trans issue as well. Women get absolutely pounded by the trans rights activists because women are wonderful. You're supposed to be wonderful. You're supposed to be accommodating. You're supposed to be nice. And I've actually seen that before. Geez, I thought women were supposed to be nice. You know, I've actually seen that as like a retort online. And so you're doubly deviant when you refuse to comply, when you refuse to be go with the flow and not make a fuss. So I saw that in sort of Margot Robbie, that she plays this sort of like women are wonderful trope, this like Christ-like perfect kind of figure. She discovers her humanity, but it only makes her more Christ-like.
Look, my perspective on Barbie as a plot-driven movie is that there isn't a lot there to recommend it overall. What enjoyment you can get out of the movie has to do with the way it presents tropes and makes nods to the culture overall, and it's playing on a meta level. It's not really presenting a traditional story. It's a postmodern film in that way. So, sure, if you want to evaluate it on the level of like which of the two characters is more developed, which is, you know, neither are very well developed. But I suppose Ken is more enjoyable to watch, and has, and because of that, he's a comedic figure, so it has a bit more of an arc. But what I was watching it for was the way in which it assembled and marshaled and played with various social critiques and ideas as it went along, and where it ended up in the affirmation of isolation was what I would have critiqued most of all. The fact that at the end of the movie, Barbie gets a vagina, and what she does with it is go to visit the gynecologist, says everything to me. The fact that it was supposedly about the existential crisis of death, but of course the problem of sex couldn't be in the movie, and for a variety of reasons, that is important. But most of all, maybe this is just because of what I tend to think about and do these days. I just thought about how it was positioned in the culture and in the culture war, how it was designed to be culture war fodder, and yet get to glance every critique of it on along those lines and on along any other lines off to the side, because it didn't take any true position or hold to a thought for long enough for you to get your teeth into it. It very consciously said nothing ultimately, but except some sort of you're good enough. You should have some esteem in yourself. Don't rely on traditional values or achievements to define yourself. Like, you don't have to have a girlfriend to love yourself, Ken. That would be
Yeah,
one
that
of
whole
the messages.
speech, that whole speech where like you're not you're this and you're not you're that. No, I mean you are those things. I hate that whole narrative too. It's like, of course, obviously, as a movie that's like a big Hollywood movie, it's gonna tell a traditional kind of story where the hero goes on a journey. Ken kind of hijacks the hero's journey a little bit, but at the end of the day, the hero becomes what the culture wants him or her to be. So what? Yeah.
I want to address this comment. Sex couldn't be in a movie about death. Keep in mind all these people calling him Zizek, but ignoring basic Freud. Look, sex couldn't be in a movie made by Mattel aimed at 13-year-old girls and designed to be a movie that, you know, mothers would take their daughters to. You couldn't have the whole plot be about Barbie getting a vagina and using it. Okay, it would have at the very least been rated R. I'm not saying that sex and death aren't related themes. All right, sorry, couldn't help but respond to that one. Go ahead.
Okay, so I said the hero's journey. It tells you at the end that this is what myth does, right? Myth at the end of the day tells you a story about a hero who becomes what the culture wants them to be. And so, what does the culture want you to be? Well, that you should be a whole self without attachments to the material world. This, I think, is a very, very powerful cultural invitation. And it is profoundly reactionary and very, very capitalistic in the sense that, you know, you have to, we talked about this last week, where the ideal subject of neoliberal capitalism must show itself to be constantly resilient to whatever threats. You can't have attachments. Yourself has to be enough, because you're going to lose everything. You're always, and you have to be resilient to that. And also, when we talked about that last week, someone said, well, I think resilience is a good thing. No, it is. But this is the issue, that it becomes sort of, first of all, weaponized, and also something that has to be like supposedly actively taught to people against all of these pressures. It becomes like this tool to like solve social problems, that really what you're missing is not like a house or ability to raise a family or a good job, but you're missing a lack of resilience, and this like causes your psychosocial problems or whatever. Anyways, so you're supposed to be resilient. You're supposed to be happy with yourself. You're supposed to love yourself first and not need another human. This is like utter atomization. This again, it's living in the void. This is how to be happy in the void. You shouldn't have attachments. You shouldn't take your relationships too seriously. You shouldn't have like children either, which is interesting. Like, they're sort of like sexless, and they're they're completely and totally atomized. Completely atomized. Anyways, you love yourself first. What does Barbie do with her vagina? She doesn't give birth or anything. She doesn't have sex. She doesn't get into all that. She submits it to surveillance and engages in self-care. That's what you do. Like, that's, as a good woman, you submit yourself to surveillance and self-care. At the end of the film, she dresses very demurely. The gone are the big wigs and the over-the-top dress-up clothes, and with every single accessory on. Her hair is flatter, it's a little bit wispy, and she's wearing still a very feminine dress, like yellow kind of flowy dress, but not over the top. And here's the interesting thing, that actually, and your culture invites you to kind of reject all of that as kind of, you know, I always say that teenage girls are the easiest target within our culture wars. Like, people will be like, on the left, anything that implicitly stands for something a teenage girl would like, they reject it. So like going to the malls, you know, teenage girls and women tend to be symbols of consumerism generally, but especially teenage girls. And so like this over the top dressing up sort of, do you want to go to the mall? Barbie, you have a very powerful, strong invitation to reject that as a culture. And at the end of the movie, Barbie does reject that. She rejects that over the top thing, and she goes into the world of work. But here's the interesting thing. When women and girls went to see that movie, they dressed up as Barbie. And that's because like only in this sort of like carnivalesque atmosphere of like a liminal state, oh, it's a fun night, and it's even just like on the edge of it, it's a bit weird even to dress up there. Only then are you permitted to actually do that. And like Halloween is another example. They used to call it the slutpocalypse. Do you remember that, millennials? Where it was the only time you were permitted, this is Mean Girls, the only time you were permitted to dress as slutty as you could. And because in the culture, you're supposed to reject that. As a good girl, you're not supposed to want attention. You're not supposed to want to look sexy. You're not supposed to be over the top. You're not supposed to be too loud. But doing all that stuff is really fucking fun. And we, and so it's only permitted when in these like brief moments of like Halloween, or people kind of made it into something that they could do. But anyways, you're not really supposed to do that. You're supposed to, at the end of the day, Barbie is still like, she's one-dimensional, she's wonderful, she dresses exactly correctly, she's not over the top, she's submits herself to commits her whole life to self-care and and then at the end this sort of symbolic self-surveillance kind of moment, or surveillance even of an authority. That's the whole feminist critique of like health screening, is this idea that as a woman you're supposed to be body conscious, and that now this is sort of public health extends that to men as well. Like because feminists fought against that for years, right? Like as a woman, you're supposed to be close to nature, body conscious, constantly thinking about yourself, constantly thinking about others. You're the guardian of like decency and all of these sorts of things. And feminists had always rejected that. But with the public health movement, they were like, you know what, ladies, actually, that's great. It's so good that you think about your body all the time. You worry about being fat. That's awesome. Men, you could learn something from these ladies. So this, like, it became like the whole toxic masculinity thing was a way of saying, in many ways, was a way of saying, hey, ladies, that was actually great. All of these, we should celebrate them. We should celebrate femininity. We should celebrate what is, basically feminine gender norms of all of these insulting ideas of being emotional and close to nature and all this stuff and body conscious. Celebrate that. That's great. And those men, they're toxic, and we should give that to them too. And if you're interested in that whole critique, by the way, there's a very good paper by Sarah Moore, 2010, called Is the Healthy Body Gendered? That's what I'm implicitly channeling here. I'm pretty sure that Sarah Moore has written more stuff since then, but I like that particular paper. Anyway, so she sort of implicitly becomes this sort of feminine ideal. And the cliched feminine ideal of Barbie is implicitly, this is what I found interesting, is that it's not totally critiqued, but you understand you're not really, so it's all very silly.
Well,
I wanted to come to
ahead.
fruition as a woman, you should reject all of that.
So I want to pick up, okay, first of all, here's another comment from Reclaim Design.
You're still on
after you talking about Barbie from the 60s had been about sex. Okay, so I actually said back to him, oh yeah, why don't you come on the stream? But we'll talk straight to face. So if he's willing, I'm going to bring him on in a minute if I can. But I want to pick up on what you're saying, like, and answer to this comment as well. It's like everything you're saying about the expectations of women, how they're on the one hand supposed to embrace certain tropes about being both silly and self-conscious, caretakers, and
well, not silly, but emotional, not rational.
Right.
That was what kept women out of public life, was this idea that they were too close to the emotions.
Yeah, emotional, not rational. And now all of these ideas have been sort of taken up as if they are liberatory, when they were something that women were trying to escape from. What I would say is that Barbie, which has been which started out as actually a novelty doll for men, basically like a sex doll, like not a doll you had sex with, but like a sexy doll that people would buy. And it I forget where it came from, but this toy designer, someone saw it and decided to make it into a toy for kids, but it was really an adult novelty toy originally. So its dimensions, there's a kind of intrinsic provocativeness to the way in which Barbie is designed. Top heavy, wide hips, you know, long legs, all of that. It's a sex object, the Barbie doll, but it's a sex object which has been neutered, repackaged, designed as a doll for girls. It's always been a critique on the left that Barbie sets unrealistic beauty standards, but also it's sort of a bizarre male fantasy being sold to little girls. So yeah, yes, Barbie has always been about sex, and also there, if you when I went to see this movie with my girlfriend, she said, you know, I had a Barbie as a kid and I used to torture it. I would strip it naked, draw it on it with markers, rip its head off.
I should have brought my kids Barbies here. They're all weird Barbie.
Yeah, right.
They play with them hard.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, it's the case that Barbie has been about sex, but if you made a movie about Barbie, which was Barbie taking up not existential dread but sexuality, and tried to do something serious with that or funny with that, make a movie about Barbie's sexuality, it could not be marketed the way this movie was marketed. I don't think. That's what I was saying.
No,
Not
of
that
course.
Barbie is not about sex. Barbie is about sex, but you couldn't market it that way.
So here's the deal, though. I don't think that Barbie, as time went on, was really about sex. I think, and I think she became more about all the different things that Barbie can be. You know, it went from that obvious kind of, and like all the weird Barbies kind of showed that trajectory towards more of like bringing in neoliberal feminism. Like, as a Barbie, you can be this, you can be that. And here's the thing that I find interesting: because Barbie is beautiful and dressed sexy does not mean that I find it funny how men read it this way, that it conveys the message that she would want sex or is available for sex. And I find that to be such an interesting thing that in society that we cannot really deal with. Like we're like, you know, feminists are like, just because a woman is dressed this way does not mean anything, blah, blah, blah. And you, as a woman, you're like, yeah, obviously. And a man's like fucking confused.
Well, let's stop there for a moment and talk about that in terms of Barbie. Why would a Barbie that's original Barbie doll before it became a child's toy that's dressed and depicted in a very highly sexualized way as sexualized object be something men would want to purchase? Do you think it's
No,
because
I'm not saying that it's something that men would want to purchase. Was that what
but
the point was? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was for men. It was marketed for men. It was
So
a novelty toy.
the doll's character arc was away from men toward girls. And I suppose you could say, like, well, then she also maintains this kind of sexual availability that then gets sold to girls. But sexual availability, I don't know, sexiness, I think is completely misunderstood as something that is for men to have sex with.
Well, let's assume that it isn't for men. Is a woman's sexiness for anyone other than themselves?
No, I mean, like, it can be. Like, I've always find this interesting that this is what I was saying. Like, oh, if a lot of women's liberation, wasn't it really just for Ken at the end of the day? Like, there's this idea in the culture that women love sex. They love sex just as much as men, which must be incredibly confusing for men, because why then do they never seem to want to do it? And it's like, oh, well, it's because the culture holds them back. And then this leads to really gross ideas in men's heads where, like, oh, well, if I just wear you down, then you'll do what you really want to do. Right. And as a woman, you're like, no, I literally just don't want to do that. It's not going to be good. But I still want to dress sexy because I like to be sexy. I like to be admired. I like to be looked at. And whereas men, if they read that as, I want to have sex with you. And this leads to all sorts of misunderstandings where they look at like a child wearing revealing clothes and they don't know how to read it. And it's really weird. And I feel like we're not really able to have an open conversation about this in our culture.
So, okay, when we talk about, listen, I don't want to make this personal.
I know. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I didn't want to kind of go off the rails on this conversation. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back.
No, but I want to talk about this for a moment about and when it comes to Barbie. So when, okay, so if a girl gets a Barbie, this is a sexual object. It is a model for how to be sexy. A girl might want to dress up like Barbie to be some admirable, to be like the doll that she identifies with. But that doesn't mean, even as she becomes an adult and and dresses in a sexy way, that she actually is feeling like she wants to have sex. Being sexy.
Yes.
Right? Okay, I'm just restating. Being sexy and wanting to have sex.
But here's the thing, like, yeah, and also I think my children will sometimes say, when they're like, they dress up and everything, they dress up as princesses and they can say, "You look sexy." And I'm like, "Girls, where did you learn this word? This is not a word for children to use." And I said, "What does sexy mean?" They said fashionable. That's what they think that word means.
Right.
So they think it means fashionable, and they enjoy wearing fashionable clothes, and they like
putting
to wear
aside,
tummy tops and that sort of thing. Whereas and they have no concept of what sex is. And so,
yeah, but you do, Ashley. And putting aside the mistakes of children, okay, you know what sexy
yeah, but
is.
I don't want to tell them that showing their bodies and dressing fashionably is an invitation to sex.
Yeah, putting aside what you tell your kids or whether they should know that or not, I'm asking about adult women dressing up in a sexy way. Okay, so and for adult women, when they dress up in what they think of as a sexy way, that is not necessarily a reflection of their own sexual desire.
No, obviously.
Right. So, what is?
I don't know. It depends, I suppose, on the situation or the person.
Right. So, if a woman doesn't want to be with men but wants to be with women, do you think she would dress up in a sexy way in order to be attractive to women? Or is being sexy completely separate from wanting sex?
I'm sure that there are some women who dress sexy because they want to have sex. I'm sure that's the case. But are you surprised to learn this? You seem a little bit confused.
Not at all. I just I'm not at all. But the way I always took it when women would say, just because I'm dressed up sexy doesn't mean I want to have sex. The next line, part of that was always with you. That I thought that a woman would go out on the town, dress up in a very sexy way with the hope of attracting either male or female attention, and then holding on to the position to choose. Obviously no one just gets to coerce their way, and just because someone's desirable and made themselves desirable doesn't mean that they have that desire back for the other person, right? That's how I always interpreted it. But not that they just didn't want it at all.
Yeah, but I'm happily married, right? And I love to dress up. I love it. And if I had a nice enough body, I would probably dress much sexier than I do. And it is because I like to look sexy.
But you're not wanting to attract the attention of your husband.
I'd like to attract all the attention of all the people. But I'm not supposed to want to do that, right? I shouldn't want to do that. This is the thing that we're kind of stuck in. You're not supposed to want attention from other people. You're supposed to be demure. And this is the thing about catcalling, I think, was some of the subtext of that debate was that you shouldn't want male attention, that the right good position was to say, "No, how dare you?" But I always remember when I was a teenager, we would specifically get dressed up, do our hair, do our makeup, wear a tummy top, and we would walk down a busy road specifically to get cars to honk at us. And my friend, and it's funny because even though I did this, I knew I wasn't supposed to. My friend hadn't got that message yet. And when someone would honk at her, she'd turn around and be like, "Thank you." And I was like, "Christina, you're not supposed to like it." I scolded her and I told her what the social norm was. So yes, I would dress sexy because I want attention. I want to be admired as beautiful and sexy.
Right. Well, I can see and understand that. completely, but I'm just saying it was, but dressing sexy and wanting sex weren't even in your imagination connected. Being sexy didn't make you feel sexual.
No, not in the slightest. Why? What? That's weird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think being a man must be so strange.
Why? How's that? What do you
Because
mean?
I think like if a man dresses sexy, he has on his mind he wants to have sex. Whereas if a woman dresses sexy, she might want to have sex, maybe. But I have much experience with girlfriends, and not a single one of them was like, "Yeah, I want to."
Listen.
I want to look hot. That's what I want.
I think that from my perspective, the number of men who think of dressing sexy as something they can do. Like for me, myself, I don't think that I'm someone who dresses sexy or could or can, I don't really do that. So, it's a completely, I always want sex and I never dress sexy. So that, it's the opposite. We're opposites. Okay. So
Yeah, so like someone says, I can only speak for myself as a man. Obviously, this person is. When I had a good body, the feeling was achievement, not being ashamed of not looking good. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, obviously, like I lift weights, I go to the gym, and particularly in the summertime, I got my winter fluff on. But in the summertime, I'm proud, and it's a lot of work. And why would I work so hard on my body if I didn't want to show it off?
Right. Well,
that sense of achievement.
Well,
like, anyways, so we're totally off topic,
and looking sexy are completely not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but I would like to look sexy as well. So anyway,
okay. All right, fine.
And I feel like and it sucks that I know that I'm not really supposed to do that. So anyway, okay, but I wanted to go back to this point about one thing that I noticed with Ryan Gosling's sort of monologue. So bringing this back to like this kind of feminism of this kind of girl boss feminism, I suppose. Why can we not have a feminism that can recognize relationships as potentially life affirming for both parties? We seem to have a lot of trouble doing that. Like when we have this, when we have a narrative of female empowerment, it's always like you have to be just as good on your own. And we really seem to struggle with this idea of being dependent and putting yourself in the hands of another person, that culturally that is. So the ending song with Ryan Gosling, do you know what it reminded me of? Because I have watched so many Disney movies. Can you?
What? No, which one?
Right is left, up is down when you're not. Come on.
Which movie is it?
You're my one true north, and I'm lost in the woods. Come on, anybody know, listeners?
I'm not as familiar.
I can't sing. Come on, Frozen 2.
Okay.
Frozen 2. There's a power ballad.
I am proud that I did not recognize, nor would I ever recommend.
I've seen this movie.
That song. I saw Frozen, and that was enough for me.
So I know I've had to watch this movie 100,000 times. I know the whole thing off by heart. Anyways, so there's a power ballad in the movie where oh my god, I say that I've seen this movie 1,000 times and I can't remember. Elsa and Anna. Anna's boyfriend / about to be fiance has this power ballad about how he's lost. Who am I if I'm not yours? Who am I if we're not together? So like in these like movies of female empowerment, they have a lot of trouble thinking about what to do with the man. And Ken and Anna's boyfriend, they're basically the same kind of character, I suppose, where they exist only to lift up the female. That's the point. And so he has this whole, and so what we do is we're like, what do I do with you? I know, I'll make you what women used to be, right? You just exist to kind of prop men up. And we are all kind of aware that that's not good enough, for a relationship. And so they have to kind of figure out who they are without this. Although I'm not sure that that happens in Frozen 2. I think he's just like, I'm in your shadow and it's great. La 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 la. I'm not a full human being or a deep character. and then he just sings and dances. And I suppose like Ken gets that too, but he doesn't get the relationship either. So it's like, I'm not a full human being. I'm just Ken. I'm Knuff. And that's fine. He doesn't even get the girl. He's like emasculated and alone. So it's worse actually in a lot of ways, but it's very similar. So there's this real difficulty making sense of characters of you have to toss one into the void. Before it was the woman, now it's the man. We seem to have this real difficulty, and we're doing this with, as I was saying, with public health as well, where it's like, instead of saying all people are capable of of living up to this enlightenment ideal of the democratic subject, where they said like women can't take part, and this is a very traditional kind of feminist critique in social policy all over the place. But anyway, women can't take part in public life because they're too close to their emotions, they're too close to nature, whereas men are more godlike, men are further from nature. And instead of being like, actually, we're all gods, we are all capable of overcoming nature, mastering nature, all these sorts of things, like none of us are that. We're all just shit. We're all just animals. Nobody's actually good enough for democracy. Democracy actually was a mistake, is the subtext. We're all just weak, fundamentally weak subjects. This is what we do. And then when we try to kind of have a narrative of empowerment, we have to kind of make the man into that weak subject. We have to destroy the male subjectivity of the sort of reasoned, close to God figure. And we have to kind of emasculate them instead of bringing everybody into this universe.
So, Ashley, I want to throw this comment up on this screen here from Madeline 13. It says, "Good morning, Ashley and Douglas. Hollywood is an organ of the ruling class." Yeah, this was actually what I wanted to talk about more than we've gotten to so far, which was how the Barbie movie was Democratic Party propaganda. But I think everything that we've been talking about, all these different critiques of it and of the culture overall, could lead back into just my initial thought, which was just that the Barbie movie is designed in such a way that it makes it more difficult to understand questions of sexual conflict or loneliness, or to come to terms with existential dread. And most of all, to think beyond the individual. And for the last few months, I've been railing against the way in which the left rejects individuality and individual liberty. But I also think the flip side of that is this idea that we are all supposed to be completely self-contained and not seeing us as a social animal that requires individual liberty to change our social relationships and society. That the individual and freedom is what will change society.
And that society makes us individuals.
Exactly, that's right. And so Ken, in the end, that's one of the things in the movie is Ken isn't an individual. There's a whole class of Ken. And he's just one of them, right? There's a whole class of Barbie. There's Barbie, all the different variations of just Barbie, and then there's Ken, just Ken. So, in fact, Ken in the end isn't an individual, but just a cog in the Barbie land machine on the Ken side. But the real question for me is what came to my mind as I saw this Instagram post from Hillary Clinton is this paranoid thought, which is that maybe it isn't just a kind of unintended consequence of the cultural moment that Barbie comes along and seems to reaffirm the Clintonite version of feminism right before the 2024 election cycle, but maybe that's by design. Maybe this is should be considered a part of the Democratic Party's campaign effort. And then I thought, well, how would I demonstrate that? I kind of poked around in it, and there's no obvious direct evidence of the Democratic Party operatives, And like it's not like the way the Department of Homeland Security is directing what is allowed on the internet. It's not like there's some. I can go read the documents where some CIA official is sitting down and emailing Greta Gerwig and telling her, "Oh no, don't put that in your movie. You need to change this to that." That I can't find that, but nonetheless, I the suspicion that it's as if these things are created by design for political purposes. But so am I paranoid? Have I gone off the deep end?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that when people make these Hollywood movies, they know that they have to follow like a very predetermined, clear path. And Barbie goes a little bit off the rails. And in fact, the fact that they have to kind of like narrate things, that there's like a narrator that has to explain like Ken lives for Barbie's enjoyment, just shows like something happened. they start the movie, probably the script maybe was written on the go, who knows. And like I was watching some interviews with Ken, and like a lot of the things that Ken does in the movie were just like start out as jokes that Ryan Gosling made, and they're like, that's great, we'll put that in the film. So you know what I mean? It's all over the place. So I wouldn't say that there's like this sort of plotting going on. But what we do when we make cultural forms is we use the cultural resources available to us. And the people who make these films are, first of all, quite conscious of the fact that they cannot go too far outside the Overton window, right? You have to tell like a blockbuster kind of story, and it has to follow a definite path. The fact that it went off the rails a little bit and became kind of Ken's movie was probably just like a mistake of the casting and all of that. But it's also interesting that happened, as it tends to happen in the culture. And the fact that it kind of winds up telling the story is just that it's drawing on the cultural artifacts available to us to make sense of the problems as they appear to someone in Hollywood writing a script. So what's the main problem that appears to somebody, I don't know, who's probably steeped in neoliberal feminism? Female empowerment, being a girl boss, not having to live for a relationship, Ken living in the shadow of Barbie. He should really actually be his own person, because we should all be our own people, and the message of the film should be that you shouldn't have material attachments. So, you think, if you're this kind of neoliberal feminist, you think, what would be a good, strong message to give to young girls today? Don't be consumerist. In a movie about Mattel dolls, it's just obviously this sort of central contradiction that, one of our commenters pointed out. Yes, of course, Marx talks about this as well, that as a worker, you're supposed to be austere, but as a consumer, you're supposed to be profligate. Yeah, that's a very obvious kind of contradiction that comes to play in this consumerist utopia that gives an anti-materialist message at the end.
I just want to say, like, in my defense, in the defense of the conspiracy theory version of Barbie, there's a long history of the state having a close relationship with Hollywood. In the 80s, a movie like Top Gun was the product of consultation with the I think it was the Navy and the Air Force, maybe the Navy, and was thought to have helped recruitment efforts around that time, even more directly. In the 50s, the CIA worked with studios to develop anti-communist propaganda in films, and even released films that were completely made by the CIA, like there's a CIA version of Animal Farms. In World War II, Disney directly worked with the state to create propaganda films.
Fun fact: in Greece, they still play some of those those Looney Tunes with Hitler.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're watching TV, you're like, whoa, swastikas.
Right. So that isn't to say that there isn't multiple levels to critique a film like Barbie, and just because a film like Top Gun was made as a part of a propaganda effort during the Reagan era, doesn't mean that it can't be taken up as art and critiqued as such and thought of as a product of our actual culture. All it means really is that we have a deeply statist culture, and that and I think it's fair to say that that Hollywood is filled with Democratic donors and Democratic Party voters and members and employees of the Democratic Party at times. We know this. We see it. There was during COVID. There was that video that made the rounds where all these different Hollywood types sang the song "Imagine." A bunch of movie stars put together a campaign ad for Hillary Clinton in 2016. That was quite cringeworthy. The alignment of celebrities with the Democratic Party is not hidden. And it's usually thought of in terms of they're Democrats rather than Republicans. But really, we ought to think, why is it that the state itself is so intertwined with the production of art? I think but I'll admit, I'm still thinking my way through this, and I don't want to, I want to.
Yeah, you're going into dangerous territory here, Doug.
Yeah.
And is there something about all those Hollywood types? Are they all maybe from a particular background? Is that where we're going with this?
No. No, that's not where I'm going with this. I think I talked about the military and Disney. I was not talking about. I'm not trying to push forward any kind of Jewish conspiracy here.
Okay, all right. That's a little sus, Doug. It's a little sus. No, okay. So the whole Democratic Party types who, I can that explanation that you gave seems quite plausible to me. That these are the people who sort of movers and shakers in Hollywood tend to be these Democratic Party types who claim to love women but actually secretly hate them. And that comes through where you supposedly make this big ode to a feminist icon, and it comes out as women are wonderful trope of this kind of Jesus Barbie who sacrifices herself. Anyway, but here's the thing too, sometimes the state doesn't have to be involved for propaganda to work effectively. Again, because myth and storytelling often tells a story about who our culture wants us to be, and culture, if we recall the cliche, is the ruling ideas of each epoch, or the ideas of the ruling class. So, they're drawing on the extant cultural forms. But also, just to get a little dig in, we were getting a little bit of hate on Twitter, and this person accused me of taking money to secretly undermine the left. And this person is literally dresses as Satan with horns and
Pan. That's Pan, not Satan.
Shit. Sorry, Pan.
You have this obviously Christian view. Pan is a perfectly, credible God in his own right.
Yeah, sorry, but what I was getting at is this kind of occultist, pagan, fashy kind of person who is, anti-family, anti-normie, proudly kind of weird person, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But the idea that this is
anything wrong with that.
whatever you do in your own bedroom is fine. But the idea that this is gonna lead the revolution. You are undermining it already, okay? You're paying to do it. If I was in the CIA, I would not pay people like me to undermine the left. What? By telling the working class to believe in itself, that it's not a bunch of fucking victims, that being a leftist doesn't mean that you're a weird blue-haired freak who's gonna take your kids away, etc. I would pay.
Twitter. There it is right there. There's our clip for Twitter.
I would pay somebody to do that. That's what I would do. If I was in the CIA, I'd be I get the weirdest fucking people ever to go and troll normal people and be like, look at their kids a little funny. Don't worry, I'll liberate you from your parents. There won't be any more bedtimes. That is how I would undermine socialism. Okay, there's no need to pay. You're doing it for free.
All right, listen, we've got an hour here. I hope everyone has learned a lot about whether or not I dress sexy. The people who are dressing up like Pan on Twitter, and my weirdo Barbie conspiracy theory. But in the second half, we'll be talking about the Transition Integrity Project, or I will, and I'm sorry, the Transition Integrity Project, and Donald Trump, and actually I'll try to be somewhat even-handed in my assessment of how much of a threat Donald Trump might be to civil liberties and left politics.
Yeah, and I'm gonna
when
show
he's
you
reelected.
my legit Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah, okay. So
At the exact moment when everybody has lost theirs, I'm like, shit, man, this guy's dangerous.
Right. So we'll talk about that in the Parrot Room. I'll put up a link and in the comments and in the description for this video. And we'll see you in about 20 minutes over on Patreon. So thanks for watching, everybody. And I will run the...
In the case of nuclear or radiological